things side by side and learn some things variety by variety. So thanks for the opportunity. And I think that's the first time I've gone through the food line first in my life.
Hey.
So I really feel like the guest of honor today. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for all the research and taking the late night texts about problems.
Yeah, no worries. So you've just eaten, so we should talk about diseases now, because that's good for the digestion. Greg asked me to just talk a little bit about kind of what we're seeing out there this year, and I would say, if we're thinking about what's going on today, I would say that if you haven't seen stripe rust on your farm yet, it's probably going to show up real soon. So stripe rust has been kind of showed up. I think the first place I heard about it was kind of around Calgary, and there seemed to be a swath between Calgary and Drumheller that got it first, and then it's just been, we've been hearing reports of it kind of just about everywhere now. It showed up in Brooks late last week, and so that's one to watch for. Now, so stripe rust can be really problematic because it multiplies so quickly, and it can really do a lot of damage in a very short time in a susceptible crop. The good news is that we have a lot of resistance that is still, most of it still works pretty well. And the other thing is that oftentimes, like this year, it can show up late enough that it's not really gonna take away a lot of yield. So for example, if your crop is already past anthesis and stripe rust shows up, you probably don't need to apply a fungicide. Once you get past anthesis, the return on investment for a fungicide application really drops off very, very steep. So the fact that it's showing up late July is good news. But there are some fields that will have pretty serious economic loss in the fields where it showed up early if it's a susceptible variety and it didn't get a fungicide in time. And we've seen some fields that are going to take a pretty big hit to stripe rust. So this year, and kind of speaking for today, stripe rust is one. The second one is if you're a lentil grower, you're going to want to get out and look below the canopy to see what's going on down there. We don't often get 5 inches of rain in July, but when we do, that's just a perfect environment for white mold and botrytis gray rot and Staphylium blight in lentil. And so sometimes, like this year, you do a drive-by and the canopy looks pretty good, but when you look underneath, kind of peel back, there's just a lot of mold going on underneath. So that's something to watch for. It's tricky to know what to do there, because when white mold and botrytis reach a certain point, a fungicide isn't going to slow them down. So it's so much disease pressure, just overwhelm. But if you see signs of things starting and you can get a fungicide that penetrates through the canopy and gets down there where you want it, and you're within your pre-harvest intervals, a fungicide application can make a difference. But you have to get it on before it gets too extreme. So those are probably the two I'd say today. I also got some texts today saying, is there something like powdery mildew in pea, but it's black? And so I got some pictures of peas that were starting to mature. The pods are ripening and they're covered with sooty mold. And so that's another thing that seems to be developing, and that doesn't often happen to us in July because we rarely get so much precipitation and humidity. So if you start to see some sooty molds developing in crops, that's to be expected because of the environment. These are things that come in, they're not primary pathogens, they come in secondarily on tissue that's already senescing or dying. So they're probably not going to have a yield impact. The only time that'd be an issue is if they had a marketability or quality effect. Okay, so if I was going to step back in time a couple of weeks, I would say the big story in southern Alberta in cereal crops was wheat streak mosaic virus. So you're probably sick of me talking about this, but I don't apologize for it. It's my job to talk about this. But I just want to remind you guys that wheat streak mosaic virus I'm going to challenge the attitude of, well, we don't have any products or tools to manage it, so we don't need to worry about it. There's nothing we can do. Sort of, but like we don't have a product we can spray to kill virus or even the mite vector, but we are the ones who control whether there's a green bridge. And so that disease is completely reliant on a green bridge from one season to the next. And we're the ones who control whether one of those exists. So we can have a big impact on how much wheat streak mosaic virus is out there. Now we're seeing an increase in cover cropping and fall seeded crops, winter crops, and that's the green bridge. So a crop that goes in, stays dormant, and then kind of comes back to life, so to speak, in the spring. That crop, when it's dormant, the virus and the vector can survive there. So we have to break the green bridge. And again, some of you heard me talk about this 100 times. I don't apologize. This is really important. You have to have an end to the spring seeded crop, and then no green tissue for a week or two before the fall or winter seeded crop comes up. So that breaking that green bridge is key to help making sure, because the virus and vector are only going to live for about a week or less if they don't have a green host. So by making there no green host, we kill it off and then we don't have to worry about it. Question, Greg.
Was I correct on the rye and wheat not being a green bridge, or was I wrong? Were you over there at the other plots?
No, I was actually scouting over here.
Amazing, thank you. With rye, it doesn't seem to be a green bridge issue. People have planted that into wheats and doesn't seem to be a problem. Is that correct, or are we missing? I'm missing something.
Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah. So rye isn't a very good host. So the wheat curl mite doesn't love rye. It loves wheat. So that's the number one. And so winter wheat is the biggest problem. I shouldn't call winter wheat a problem. I really like winter wheat as a crop. And I have to say that because Rob Graff is here. But I do think that anyway. So winter wheat's a great crop.
Spring wheat is the problem.
Oh, okay. That's good. So wheat is an excellent host for wheat streak mosaic virus, and the vector, the wheat curl mite, loves wheat. So barley is a host. We don't see wheat streak mosaic as much in barley, but I've got an example of it here on the table if you want to see it. And then rye and oat, they are hosts, but they're not as good. So is it potentially is there a risk? Yes, but it's much lower than it would be with something like winter wheat. Other question, Mike.
I was talking to Mike earlier about it. We've got some plots with fall rye and winter wheat beside each other, and it looks like we're getting some virus coming through on the barley that we're growing this spring because of that green ridge, but it doesn't look like it's happening on those fall rye plots. So we're going to get it tested and we can get you an answer.
Yeah. So you're at a much lower risk with rye, but it is still potentially a green bridge. I mean, so are grassy weeds and volunteers. So, but the biggest risk by far is wheat. Okay. Is that enough about wheat streak mosaic? You guys tired of me talking about that? Second, so of all the samples that have come to us this year for diagnostics, we've seen more wheat streak mosaic virus than anything else. The second is bacterial leaf streak, and you're probably sick of me talking about this one too, but again, I don't apologize for it, it's my job. And so bacterial leaf streak, we saw it early, especially in some barley fields. A number of barley fields had symptoms of bacterial leaf streak early, but then it didn't really move up the plant at all. It just kind of stayed down on the first few leaves, and then we were like, okay, well, this is a year where we're probably not going to see a lot of bacterial leaf streak issues because the environment isn't really driving it. And then the environment changed a lot, and we got a significant amount of humidity and rainfall and splashing. And then, probably a week ago, I started getting calls and samples coming in, and we're seeing, right now anyway, what I'm seeing is durum wheat having some issues with bacterial leaf streak, but even more so black chaff, so getting up onto the heads and causing damage on the heads. So the environment changed on us, and it changed the bacterial leaf streak situation. So that's something you're going to want to keep an eye out for. Again, there's probably nothing we can really do at this point to intervene, but it's good to be aware of these things. Now, the good thing on the bacterial leaf streak side of things, is that the bacterium doesn't like cold temperatures. So the fact that it's, when we get the rain, it's been cool, that will slow down the bacterium a little bit. If it's 29 and raining, that's really worst case scenario. But when it's 12 degrees and raining, that's not as good for the bacterium. So I realize that lots of times what's good to keep diseases at bay isn't good for crop production, because there's a lot of crops out there right now that do need heat. But I'm a plant pathologist, so I'm talking about this from the pathology side of things. Anything else that I want to mention here? I don't think so. I think I've hit all the highlights. So for people that like to get updates on what's going on or are kind of keen to do some diagnostics on their own, I brought some things today that might be of interest to those folks. The first is I have some samples that I just taped to some cardstock that you can have a look at. And what I want to talk about today is diagnosing based on symptoms. Greg, how much time do you want me to take? Like, when do you want me to stop?
As much as they want to listen to you.
Okay, well with that I'll wrap up and
But leave some time for questions after. Like,
Sure.
keep going, and then people probably have a few questions.
Okay, so I'll keep this short. But one of the things I want to talk about is when you're out looking at things, one thing that's important is, like, lots of times I'll get a photograph sent to me and people say, what is this? And I'll say, well, it's a blurry picture of your wheat crop. I don't know. And that doesn't happen very often anymore. Our phones are pretty good and you guys are pretty good at taking photos. But sometimes I'll look at it and I'll be like, that could be one of three things, because the symptoms can sometimes blend together. And so a really good example of how symptoms can change is, like, take a look at the difference between bacterial leaf streak on barley, which is a big, long lesion that kind of runs right down the middle of the leaf in lots of cases, and bacterial leaf streak on durum. It looks really different. So varieties, classes, cultivars, and environment can change, can push on symptoms so that they aren't always the same every time. I recognize that sometimes you need information to make a decision right now. But sometimes my job is to take, a little longer, take more time to really figure out, is this what we think it is? So sometimes, people will send me something and I'll say, yeah, it could be that. So you may want to, decide what decision you want to make. But if you really want to know what it is, it's going to take us a few weeks to get a correct diagnosis. So there's two sides to this. And today we're going to talk about spot the symptoms. But I wanted to start it off with a caution that sometimes we look at symptoms and we come to a conclusion and it's not correct. We do testing, we do lab testing, and we're like, oh, that fooled me. That's not wheat streak mosaic virus, that's bacterial leaf streak. So keep that in mind. So for those of you that are interested in kind of understanding more about diseases and symptoms, there's a new version of the book Diseases of Field Crops in Canada that's just been just come out. And if you're interested in getting a copy of it, you can take one of these cards and there's information on the back for who to contact on how to get a copy of that book. And this book is kind of, it was made so that it'll sit on the back of a tailgate or, in the passenger seat, it'll sit open. And there's, it's kind of a photographic, you can look through the photographs and be like, which looks most like what I'm seeing on my crop? And lots of times you'll be right. Sometimes it won't be correct because you'll need to get testing done, but that's one way to do it. The second thing is, I have here some examples of fact sheets, and this stuff's all available online, so you can get it on your phone or your tablet or your device. But if you do have a file folder that you carry stuff around in, there's good information in these fact sheets, and I brought them just for the diseases that I've got examples of here on the table. But if you have questions and want more information or this kind of information, just let me know. I can point you in the right direction. So the last thing I want to tell you about getting updates and being aware of what's going on. So this little game that I have here set up, and I'm unveiling this for the first time here today. You're the first to see this, so I'm really curious to see if it's a hit or if it's a dud. But it's a game that you look through and you see a description and photographs of symptoms, and you're like, well, that's a canola stem that has a canker at the base. I'm going to guess that that's blackleg. Oh, my game is falling apart. And then you take this off to reveal, and hey, I was right. So come and give it a shot if you're interested in trying to match the symptoms. But the real reason I brought this is because I want to make you aware, if you're not yet, of the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network. And so at this website, you can sign up for in-season updates. There's a QR code you can scan here to go right to it. But it's prairiecropdisease.com, I think. If you Google prairie crop disease or prairie crop disease monitoring, you'll find it. And so, to give you an example, when stripe rust showed up for the first time, we put out an alert through the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network saying, hey, stripe rust showed up in this county, so just be aware. So Kelly Turkington at Lacombe, he's with Ag Canada at Lacombe, leads the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network, and he's the one who provided this game board for me. So thanks to Kelly for that. And Kelly also works with another group at Ag Canada that tracks air movement, like wind direction and wind trajectories. And they do that for kind of all of North America because stripe rust doesn't overwinter here, but it blows in. And so most of the time in southern Alberta, we get it from the Pacific Northwest where it overwinters. And then on the eastern prairies, it comes from Nebraska, Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, that corridor. And so they track wind trajectories and crop stages and stripe rust development in those overwintering areas, and then they put out a risk forecast for, are we likely to see stripe rust this week or not, based on those wind trajectories, and are there stripe rust spores in the air. So those forecasts are good, and then when stripe rust does show up, we try to put out alerts. And similarly, the first time we had a wheat streak mosaic virus positive, we put out an alert saying, hey, this is something that's out and about. Just be aware that this could be what you're seeing in your fields. And for things like bacterial leaf streak, bacterial leaf streak, wheat streak mosaic, barley yellow dwarf, aster yellows, these are things that don't respond to a fungicide because they're not fungi. And so we don't manage them the same way. So for wheat streak mosaic, it's green bridge management. For barley yellow dwarf, we try to time our crop so that it's not in a green productive or reproductive stage when the aphids migration comes up from the south. And for bacterial leaf streak, we try to manage through rotation and trying to not move it around in other ways. So that's some of the information that's available on the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network, and then some of the other things that I have here. So I'm going to leave the rest of the time for questions or comments, and I would love it if some people came up and tried their luck at identifying some of these diseases. I think most of these there's no trick questions. We're not trying to fool anybody, so a lot of these will be pretty straightforward. But it'd be interesting to see if this is something that's useful or fun or whatever. So please let me know. Okay, questions, comments?
Could I start?
Yes.
Leaf tip necrosis, where it's coming back, how much of a yield impact does that have, or what's the feeling around that? Because you're resisting disease, but you're losing leaf.
I wish I had a good answer for that, Craig.
Okay.
I don't know the answer. Rob, do you know?
There's been different studies looking at that, and there is a small yield effect, but at the same time, if your crop is under pressure from the disease, you're far better off having that gene that causes the necrosis than not having it. So it's kind of a catch-22, do you have it or not? I don't know, I would say that in cases where you don't have disease pressure and you've got the leaf tip necrosis, you're probably looking somewhere in that 5 to 7% range, but it's really hard to say.
Does anybody know if the environment affects the leaf tip necrosis? It does. Okay, thanks, Rob. Do you want to tell us about that too? Does hot, dry, windy weather make it worse?
It's a good question. It may, although actually cool weather can make it worse, and that's why in the winter weeds you don't see leaf tip necrosis for the most part. It's because we don't use those genes in winter wheat because under colder conditions it actually causes the plants to languish.
So is that a gene expression effect?
Yes, it's a gene
Okay.
expression effect.
That's very interesting.
Well, and thinking of the opening, like I saw a plot near Saskatoon, cleanest leaf ever, come here and on some seed fields, and it's like, oh, yeah, the flag leaf looks a little bit shot, you know? So I think it depends on the year a lot and the area.
So it sounds a lot like a seed treatment. You don't know for sure if you're going to need it, like the rust resistance gene, but it's better to have it and not need it when there's a risk, when there's a significant risk, than it is to not have it and then it's too late. Yeah.
Anyone else seeing anything? Oh, Ben.
In your discussion on your green grape determination, is it effective just to the glyphosate as a chemical burn down, or is tillage more effective, or what's the best? Just give it some time between that is not what, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I already talked to somebody else about that today.
Repeat the question.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so for termination of a crop to break that green bridge, glyphosate, tillage is one better than the other. So glyphosate takes some time, and so when there's green host tissue, you can have the mite vector and the virus still surviving. So a glyphosate termination might take a little longer than using a desiccant or some other thing that's going to kill the crop more quickly, or tillage. So that you'll have to make that judgment call. If you're looking to double crop, you want a quick turnaround. But if you're just looking, to terminate your spring seeded crop, so that you can put in a fall seeded crop, and you've got a 3-week window, then you're probably okay there. So it's a good question. I've even seen some cases where, depending on how the tillage plays out, you can still have some escapes that are green for a while. So it really depends. But the key is you want to have the least amount of green tissue for at least a week. 2 is better. And then the virus and vector are done. Yeah. Or they've moved into the neighboring green field.
Well, how much does your neighbor's field impact yours? If your neighbor's green and
It's
you're
a
planting
community
winter wheat?
disease because
Okay.
it's vectored by a mite, so the mite is flightless. It doesn't have wings, but it moves on wind and breeze, which we sometimes have in southern Alberta. So yeah, it crawls up to the top of the plant, and then the wind carries it either throughout the field or into the adjacent field. So yeah, and so when the crop is starting to mature, those mites are like, we got to get out of here. We got to go find a different field, and they're dependent on whatever direction the wind is blowing, but they'll try to find their way to a green field.
Sounds like Roundup Ready Kosha.
There's a question here. What controls would you suggest for bacterial leaf streak? Like rotation and.
Yeah,
I should mention anyone that came late. There's a stick over there and a stick over there that says fungicide, and we did a Karuva. It was a copper product, and so 60 feet on either side of those sticks. We went through the copper product to see what the impact would be on different varieties through here if there was an issue. So I did do a walkthrough earlier this week, and I don't know if I saw anything or not, but I gotta do more work. But go ahead.
yeah. When I walked through, it was in one variety, and I was like, oh, I think I'm seeing something here. But then in the next one, I'm like, I don't think so. So it'll be interesting to see at the end of the season kind of what plays out there. So the answer to your question is, because bacterial leaf streak is still a relatively new issue for us, and we haven't been breeding for resistance, and we haven't been testing products, and we don't have seed treatments, we really don't have any good management tools other than you try to avoid it. And so you can avoid it by having a crop rotation of a 2-year break from host crops and bringing in as, seed that has the least amount of risk as you can get your hands on. Now, anybody that's tested seed knows that it's not easy to find seed that doesn't have at least a little bit on it. And that's how it's kind of hung around. Like, we've seen bacterial leaf streak in Alberta for, more than 80 years. It's not like a new thing. It's just kind of emerged for a bunch of reasons I won't try to speculate on here, but it's now a serious issue that we have to try to contend with, and we just don't have any real in-season management tools. So what would we love to have? Well, we'd love to have a seed treatment. We'd love to have a foliar applied product that could, suppress it or control it. And we'd love to have resistant varieties. We don't have any of those 3 things yet. We probably will get some varieties that have a little better tolerance. I don't know that we'll get anything that's fully resistant, like immune to the disease, but we will get varieties that are improved for tolerance. And so it's really crop rotation and just trying to start out the season with the least amount of risk as possible. Now, we've seen examples where seed with very little risk on it ended up with a lot of bacterial leaf streak at the end of the season, because if you get a big thunderstorm system moving through and it picks up a lot of bacterial leaf streak pathogen from one field, it'll just follow the storm. So there are ways that it can move around on its own, but we haven't had a real thunderstormy year for a while. And the last time we did was the last year we saw fields with high levels, like economic loss due to bacterial leaf streak. So I'm going to answer your question by saying, when it comes to copper applied bactericide, what I know from watching the dry bean industry that has been battling bacterial diseases for 75 years or however long they've been growing beans here, you can't apply copper once and control bacteria because they multiply so rapidly when the conditions are right, and they'll spread so quickly with irrigation splash and rain splash. So I think if we want to really evaluate copper products, we have to look at something where, once you start to see the disease threaten the flag leaf, or in barley the penultimate leaf, you apply and then you scout and watch the disease, and if there's risk, you reapply every 10 days, 10 to 14 days. And that's how they manage some of these bacterial diseases in other crops. So, we're used to managing fungi with fungicides, and those products work well. We spray them usually at a specific crop stage or at a certain timing, and we kind of got it covered. Occasionally we'll have 2 applications of a fungicide, unless there's some pulse crops where we're going to have multiple applications of fungicide. But generally speaking, with fungicides, we kind of wait for that optimum application time and we do it once. I'm not sure that it's going to be the same for these bacterial diseases. And so if we can get to the point where we have seed treatments that can kind of put a stop to it at that stage, and good crop rotation and some tolerant varieties, that might be the answer. But I'm really curious. And so there's this trial that Stamp Seeds has done here, and there's another one at North Paddock Farms that I'm really interested to look at and see if there's anything we can see there. So probably not a great answer that you were hoping for, but that's the reality of where we're at. We just really don't have great management options for bacterial leaf streak yet.
And it's a tough one because you look at any seed testing, it's all trace, or it's all whatever, like there's...
Yeah, how often do you get a non-detected? Very rare.
It's rare. And so you talk to the customer, it's like, okay, well, here's what we got going on, and so there are lots with none or whatever, but honestly, that doesn't really mean you're going to have a clean field or not. Like, it doesn't translate, and then we've seen it where you have a yield that's impacted in the next year, where we have like a higher pedigree of, say, a winter wheat, and then that field the next year, highest yield ever, like not an issue, like in that season. So it's more of just being aware of what's on it and knowing the risk, but honestly, there's probably not there's probably not zero seed out there. And this year's gonna be worse in my estimation because of all the rains in July. Yeah, across the board.
Yeah, so the seed test result is a piece of the story. It's a piece of information that tells you something, but it's not always very predictive of what is going to happen by the end of the season, because the environment is going to have a lot to say about how it plays out.
Yeah, I'll bring it to you.
I can hold it. Heard that there's a rust now that's overwintered in Ontario. Should we be concerned that that's going to happen here?
Rust in Ontario.
Absolutely. So anytime rust can overwinter here on the Canadian prairies or in Ontario, that's a bad situation, because then you're battling stripe rust, in May or early June, all the way through. And if you're growing a susceptible variety, the prognosis is not good. Stripe rust has overwintered in Alberta once or twice in the last 25 years-ish? Twice? Maybe twice. And the only time it overwinters is when we have a very mild winter and or a lot of snow cover to insulate the winter wheat crop under the ground. So if we get a lot of snow cover that sticks, so here where we get Chinooks, that's almost never, right? Like, it's rare that snow shows up in October, November and sticks around all the way through to March. But occasionally, when we do get snow, an insulating snow cover that lasts for a really long time, then the stripe rust can overwinter. But the stripe rust pathogen doesn't produce an overwintering stage here. So pretty much never does it. So was your question, am I worried about that? About stripe rust overwintering? Yeah. Anytime we have a lot of snow cover, or where we don't get cold temperatures for extended periods in southern Alberta, I'm always thinking about the overwintering diseases, and stripe rust is one of them. So it was Kay Kwan Shi at Alberta Agriculture in Lacombe that did some really great work on overwintering of stripe rust just at the right time where he caught it, and did some really nice work. So yeah, if it can happen, it's a big risk, big risk. And so if that started to become more of a reality, or happen more frequently, then growing stripe rust resistant varieties and being prepared to apply fungicides when you start seeing more than 1 plant per square meter with a significant amount of rust on it, that's going to be our new reality. So thankfully right now it's not, and we can monitor how things are developing in the overwintering areas in the United States, and then when it shows up, it's usually later in the season like this year, and we can tolerate it. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Okay, well thanks everyone. It's good to be here, and
Thanks for coming, Mike. It's always scary having him walk through your fields, actually. Oh, what did you find now? He's a scary guy in ag.
you're welcome.
So yeah, feel free to talk to Mike and come try out the game to see if you know what's behind the board. And so that's kind of the end of the affair. If you came a little late, our pea plots, we mowed out some of the plots. So after this, all we're going to do is actually just go look at a green pea versus a marrow fat pea on irrigation a mile north. So likely what I'll do is maybe Blair, I'll kind of lead the charge there, and then you can visit with people that aren't going there, and we'll split up. And some of our staff are going to start cleaning up and stuff like that here. But feel free to grab a flyer or relax for a little bit more as people kind of clean up. Chat with Mike, and that's kind of the end of the tour, unless anyone's got any exciting questions before I lead the charge over to the green peas. So okay. Thanks for coming. It's awesome to have a good turnout and makes all the effort worthwhile. And but honestly, we learn as much from doing this as you do touring it. It really helps us pick the varieties that we want to be selling to the right people. And when it comes to fall crops here, if you're thinking fall crops, get chatting with Blair from here onwards, because the earlier you start planning, the better the situation usually is. So that's where we're at right now. Harvest is going to start pretty quick for our team, and fall crops are starting to ship out now. And if there's a variety you really want and you want to call back in October, Blair does have a callback list where if you have pricing on something, you can get on that list and be one of the first people to get a call back on a specific variety that you think is going to sell well. So that's that. So we'll kind of just grab a water, and whoever's gonna, I'm gonna grab my truck and I'll kind of drive down that way, and we'll go to the pea field, and from there it's over. So use the bathroom and grab a water before we go. I'll wait 5 or 10 minutes before we actually leave the field here. So thanks for coming.